Mixing with my plugin of the week is the SPL Vitalizer MK2-T. The SPL Vitalizer is an actual hardware unit. It's an emulation of a hardware unit that is valve-based and used in music production and mastering. So in this particular case, what I have is a song for mastering set up, and I have this sort of right on the end of the chain. There's not a lot in here, just a simple filtering on the top and bottom. Actually, just on the bottom here, and a little bit of a tape emulation thing in there, which I kind of like. So I'm going to kind of leave this and use this as more or less the shaping phase of it, because this doesn't have like a low-end filter or anything in it. So I just kind of wanted to work with it from the basis of what it is. So I might place this differently in my processing chain before limiting or any other forms of processing. But just to give a basic idea of what this is, essentially it's by its description, if you look through the manual, it's a psychoacoustic audio, it applies psychoacoustic audiometric principles in terms of the design and the way that it actually works with the audio. So what does that mean? Because you get into terminology like that, it can kind of mean anything. You can make up words, basically. But essentially the way that they describe it is that it takes high-level information and sort of moves it out of the way of the low-level information that is underneath it, and then it maximizes what that is. So it's not a low-level compressor. It's kind of a lot of things all in one, and you kind of have to go section by section to kind of understand it a little bit. The basic design of this is such that it really works with some of the principles of Fletcher-Munson curves. So going back to the 1930s, where the testing of our hearing with level relative to frequency response exposed a lot of the some very important information that is the basis of a lot of engineering work. So we know that when we turn speakers down, that low-level information disappears, as does high information. So when you get kind of below like 200 cycles and above 6K, it starts to drop off pretty rapidly. So many of the, it started out years ago as like a little bit of a bass boost or a loudness button that you would push. And what that would do on the stereo system is it would sort of bring up low end and high frequencies to sort of balance out the frequency response. You could sort of listen at a lower volume as if, and still hear everything kind of full frequency. So you weren't losing necessarily the bass response relative to everything. And this sort of in a much more sophisticated way, does a very similar type of thing. Now, when you first start working with the plugin, you see a drive control right at the very beginning. Now, that's not a drive in terms of a distortion control. It's more like a threshold. It's more like when the processing is happening, how much of it is being worked. Like how hard are you kind of working the unit? So as you go higher, it's going to work the unit a little bit harder, and it's going to make the processing a little bit more intense. If you go backward, it's going to lessen the processing. So this is not necessarily something that you start with. There is a bass control, which is right here. So if I start here, and I can just kind of, zero out some of my settings here so we can kind of start from fresh. What I have here is an area that has a bass and a mid-high frequency tune, and then a process control. And as you can see, all of these guys are kind of bracketed together here, right? So the drive control is sort of on its own, but it does affect everything. And these four knobs here are connected together. So what happens is that what we have here is a bass control, and it allows us in a very simple way to either tighten it or soften it by pulling the knob either to the left for softening or to the right. So one is going to keep the low end a little bit more open, kind of, in some ways, kind of push it a little bit more, and the other is going to tighten it up. And then there's a compressor circuit which works only on the low frequencies and the low frequency energy to kind of help shape and control that so that it doesn't get uneven, right? So if you wanted to like have the kick drum kind of push a little bit more, you might soften it up and compress it, and it would just work on those low end frequencies. Now, where this is all connected is with the process control, because the process control is not only going to work the effect of the bass and the amount of it, but also the amount of what's called the mid-high tune. And what this does is it sets sort of a crossover point at which frequencies above the selection here will get boosted and frequencies below in the mid-range will get dipped, So there's sort of a combination process here. So when you set this threshold and you bring the process control up, what's going to happen is that you are actually going to be boosting signals above the selected frequency and doing an attenuation at frequencies below, and then you got the bass control over here. So what it's doing is it's a much more sophisticated way of kind of balancing the overall low end, high end, and how they interact together. And this is so important because this is like a master's tool for creating height and size in opening up like a master or a mix or a particular sound. Because when you can get the low end and the high end to sort of interact together with the mid-range dip, you actually kind of stretch the sound. High frequencies will pull them kind of up in the speakers. Low frequencies will want to pull things down in the speakers or lower below the speakers. And the two of them together will kind of stretch the sound out a little bit. And we're going to hear some audio examples of that in a second. Now, if in the process of attenuating, depending upon where you set this, you may end up losing some intensity in the mid-range. And that's what the LC EQ here is for. So the LC is kind of an interesting thing because what it is like it's a passive coil filter. And this is a technology that was used before the 1960s for equalization circuits. And it was later replaced with more efficient circuits, but it has a unique character sound to it, which is kind of cool. And the tubes that are used in the circuitry of this processor help to kind of really smooth that out as well. So there's just an intensity control and a frequency selection, and then you're kind of working in some of the frequency areas there. And then there's also an expander control. The expander control is kind of interesting as well because instead of sort of like an MS spreading thing, where sometimes you'll get controls like this where what it does is it essentially just pushes up side energy without affecting the mid signal. And what that does is it gives you the effect of a widening or widthening without, which is just basically raising the level of the outside. And what this does is it actually takes some of the right signal, feeds it out of phase to the left side, and takes the left signal, feeds it out of phase to the right side. So when you bring this up, it's bringing up the amount of that. And what that does is it actually creates some width in the stereo imaging. And to some degree, it's going to lessen the mid. So usually in a mid-side processor, your width control is basically how much center signal versus how much side signal. And to some degree, it's more or less doing a very similar type of thing, but all on one knob. And then you have an output control, which is just a pure gain control. Over here with the settings, what's really cool is you can store presets here. So if I set up a group of settings and then switch over to setting B, it'll automatically store whatever it is that I had just created there. And that gives you the ability to kind of create some different presets and ABCD them. You can also bypass this, which is like turning the on switch or off switch, power switch off. It actually flashes when you first put it on, indicating that the tubes are warming up. So on the actual hardware unit itself, when it's flashing, it's like the tubes are coming up to a state. So usually in that case, the bias circuitry is opened up and the tube has to reach a certain, the tubes will need to get to a certain saturation state and be there in a fully warmed, consistent state for you to get the full sound. So it's typical with tube technology, you boot it up like, or power it up like an hour prior to when you want to actually use it. And that gives the tubes time to fully warm up and stabilize. So, for that type of thing. For this, they don't make you wait. Basically, it's a plug-in for crying out loud. Although it sounds pretty damn real. So let's have a listen and talk a little bit about what some of these controls are. And so we'll kind of start by kind of wheeling in let's listen to the audio first without it, and then we'll kind of, maybe that's a better way to start. And then So in this case, we're not really doing anything, but here I want to kind of set this. There's music in your voice. So I'm going to set up a moderate amount of processing. A song so soft and sweet that I had no choice. So as I swing this up here, you'll hear that this gets brighter. and duller as I go up higher in frequency. So this is sort of backward because, again, it's dipping what's below here. So if I set it to 22 kilohertz, it's dipping frequencies below 22K. So what I really am looking for on the top end here is trying to find that place, and I'm exaggerating here a little bit for effect so you can hear it, find that place for this particular mix where it centralizes, where I get the effect that I'm looking for, bringing the air and the presence in without necessarily over dipping mid-range and not over boosting higher frequencies, basically.
To make it clear, so I'm sitting here waiting by the phone. Talk to me, baby, I don't wanna be wrong. Talk to me, baby.
So I like that area, like somewhere around 6K. And let's kind of take a look at the low end. So it's tight. That's loose. And that's with nothing. So what I can do here is there's a couple ways I can do this. If I wanted to kind of make the low end a little more lively, I can pull this back a little bit. And then what I could do is use the compressor to kind of tighten it up a little bit here.
Just for you, and I know you love me too. So I'm sitting
and I can see the gain reduction meter here.
Talk to me, baby. I don't wanna be wrong. Talk to me, baby. What's the use in taking so long? I will be waiting for you to come on home. So talk to me, baby.
All right, so let's go back and just kind of A/B this in and out here for a second. So notice the effect of this in terms of stretching the sound up and down.
A song so soft and sweet that I had no choice, my love. I'm praying for a whisper in my ear, just a sound to make it clear. So I'm sitting here waiting by the phone. Talk to me, baby, I don't wanna be wrong. Talk to me, baby, what's the use in taking so long? I will be waiting for you to come on home. So talk to me, baby, tell me that I'm not alone. My heart is open wide, and in the safety of my arms you can hide my love.
So what you can hear with this is it's very cool in terms of it has like a great, like very musical quality to it in terms of the way that it kind of works. And now here, if I wanted to kind of go in and work some of the EQ a little bit here, I could kind of
lay on my desire just for you, and I know you love me too. So I'm sitting here waiting by the phone. Talk to me, baby, I don't wanna be wrong. Talk to me, baby.
So what I did there was just to kind of bring out a little bit more of the intensity of the voice here. So I kind of went, because I'm at 6K right there, and then I'm just kind of bringing it in this like closer to like 2 or 3K, somewhere in there, to kind of add a little bit of an intensity into that. Brings a little bit of focus and clarity to the guitars as well.
There's music in your voice, a song so soft and sweet that I had no choice.
And now I can drive this a little bit more if
I'm praying for a whisper in my
so you could hear it's like
just a sound
overworking.
to make it clear. So I'm sitting here waiting by the phone. Talk to me, baby, I don't wanna be wrong.
So you can hear like how I can increase the effect. It sort of swallows up a little bit as I start to push that up higher, and then kind of goes away. So I have some way of adjusting in here to kind of work with that. The one last thing that I want to go over here is the stereo expander. So this just allows us to sort of spread the imaging a little bit. And so let's kind of take it to some extremes and kind of give an idea what this is all about. So you really hear the phasing. It's a pretty dramatic effect on the max end.
There's music in your voice.
And the center image is going to get swallowed up. You hear more reverberant energy.
A song so soft and sweet that I had no choice, my love. I'm praying for a whisper in my ear, just a sound to make it clear. So I'm sitting here waiting by the phone. Talk to me, baby, I don't wanna be wrong. Talk to me, baby, what's the use in taking so long? I will be waiting for you to come on home. So talk to me, baby, tell me that I'm not alone. My heart is...
And what this is cool in a subtle way, it can help to kind of add a little bit of width. So I kind of like it at a more or less subtle setting, somewhere a little bit less than 4, to kind of just stretch the imaging just a little bit. I don't want to swallow up the middle, but the vocal has enough volume to it that it doesn't, eat that up too much. You have to go to pretty extreme settings for that. But what it does is in widening the mix, it helps to bring out some of the depth. So if you really listen for that, I'll kind of go back and forth here with and without it. And you kind of get a sense of the depth that it adds in.
There's music in your voice, a song so soft and sweet that I had no choice, my love. I'm praying for a whisper in my ear, just a sound to make it clear. So I'm sitting here waiting by the phone. Talk to me, baby, I don't wanna be wrong. Talk to me, baby, what's the use in taking so long? I will be waiting for you to come on home. So talk to me, baby, tell me that I'm not alone. My heart is open wide, and in the safety of my arms you can hide. My love, I'm laying my desire just for you, and I know you love me too. So I'm sitting.
So you can hear how it adds like width, height, and depth just by kind of working some of the individual settings. It's a very cool plugin, and a great emulation of the actual hardware unit. Really good mastering style processor. It's hard to kind of call it necessarily an EQ or call it a compressor or give it a like very specific name. But it's a really powerful tool, and the more that you dig into it, the more you kind of get an idea of what the capabilities are. A really great emulation, great mastering tool, and one worth having for a mastering plugin collection, at least, if not for your mixing work. There you have it, the SPL Vitalizer MK2-T.